Hello, this is Migrant People, an excerpt from The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. The cars of the migrant people crawled out of the side roads onto the great cross-country highway, and they took migrant ways to the west. In the daylight, they scuttled like bugs to the westward, and as the dark caught them, they clustered like bugs near to shelter and to water. And because they were lonely and perplexed, because they had come from a place of sadness and worry and defeat, and because they were all going to a new mysterious place, they huddled together, they talked together, they shared their lives, their food, and the things they hoped for in the new country. Thus it might be that one family camped near a spring, and another camped for the spring and for company. Spring is like water coming out of the ground, and a third because two families had pioneered the place and found it good. And when the sun went down, perhaps 20 families and 20 cars were there. So let's stop and answer number one after that opening paragraph about what direction they are heading. In the evening, a strange thing happened. The 20 families became one family. The children were the children of all. The loss of home became one loss, and the golden time in the West was one dream. And it might be that a sick child threw despair into the hearts of 20 families, of 100 people, that a birth there in a tent kept 100 people quiet and awestruck through the night, and filled 100 people with the birth joy in the morning. A family which the night before had been lost and fearful might search its goods and find a present for a new baby. In the evening, sitting about fires, the 20 were one. They grew to be units of the camps, units of the evenings and the nights. A guitar unwrapped from a blanket and tuned, and the songs, which were all of the people, were sung in the nights. Men sang the words, and women hummed the tunes. Every night a world created, complete with furniture, friends made and enemies established, a world complete with braggarts and cowards, with quiet men, with humble men, with kindly men. Every night relationships that would make a world established, and every morning the world turned the world torn down like a circus. At first the families were timid in the building and tumbling worlds, but gradually the technique of building worlds became their technique. The leaders emerged, and the laws were made, and codes came into being. And as the worlds moved westward, they were more complete and better furnished, for the builders were more experienced in building them. The families learned what rights must be observed: the right of privacy in the tent, the right to keep the past black hidden in the heart, the right to talk and to listen, the right to refuse help or to accept, to offer help or to decline it, the right of son to court and daughter to be courted, the right of the hungry to be fed, the rights of the pregnant and the sick to transcend all other rights. So stop and answer number two about what rights must be observed. And the families learned, although no one told them, what rights are monstrous and must be destroyed: the right to intrude upon privacy, the right to be noisy while the camp slept, the right of seduction or rape, the right of adultery and theft and murder. These rights were crushed because the little worlds could not exist for even a night with such rights alive. And there's number three about what rights must be destroyed. And as the worlds moved westward, rules became laws, although no one told the families. It is unlawful to foul, like to go to the bathroom, near the camp. It is unlawful in any way to foul the drinking water. It is unlawful to eat good, rich food near one who is hungry unless he is asked to share. And with the laws, the punishments, and there were only two: a quick and murderous fight or ostracism. And ostracism was the worst. Ostracism means they kick you out and don't let you come back. For if one broke the laws, his name and face went with him, and he had no place in any world, no matter where created. In other worlds, social conduct became fixed and rigid, so that a man must say good morning when asked for it, so that a man might have a willing girl if he stayed with her, if he fathered her children and protected them. But a man might not have one girl one night and another the next, for this would endanger the world. So you can't be a player out in this world. The families moved westward, and the technique of building the worlds improved so that the people could be safe in their worlds. And the form was so fixed that a family acting within the rules knew it was safe in the rules. There grew up government in the worlds, with leaders, with elders. A man who was wise found that his wisdom was needed in every camp. A man who was a fool could not change his folly with his world. And a kind of insurance developed in these nights. A man with food fed a hungry man, and thus insured himself against hunger. And when a baby died, a pile of silver coins grew at the door flap, for a baby must be well buried, since it has had nothing else of life. An old man may be left in a potter's field, but not a baby. A certain physical pattern is needed for the building of a world. Water, a riverbank, a stream, a spring, or even a faucet left unguarded. And there is needed enough flat land to pitch the tents, a little brush or wood to build the fires. If there is a garbage dump not too far off, all the better, for there can be found equipment, stovetops, a curved fender to shelter the fire, and cans to cook in and eat from. And the worlds were built in the evening. The people moving in from the highways made them with their tents and their hearts and their brains. In the morning, the tents came down, the canvas was folded, the tent poles tied along the running board, the bed put in place on the cars, the pots in their places. And as the families moved westward, the technique of building up home in the evening and tearing it down with the morning light became fixed, so that the folded tent was packed in one place, the cooking pots counted in their box. And as the cars moved westward, each member of the family grew into their proper place, grew into their duties, so that each member, old and young, had their place in the car. So that in the weary, hot evenings when the cars pulled into the camping places, each member had their duty and went to it without instruction. Children to gather wood, to carry water, men to pitch the tents and bring down the beds, women to cook the supper and to watch while the family fed. The women really get the short end of the stick. They just watch while the family eats. And this was done without command. The families, which had been units of which the boundaries were a house at night, a farm by day, they changed their boundaries. In the long, hot light, they were silent in the cars moving slowly westward. But at night, they integrated with any group they found. So there's answer number 4 about the various roles of the children, the men, and the women. Thus, they changed their social life, changed as in the whole universe, only mankind can change. Only humans can change. They were not farm men anymore, but migrant men. And the thought, the planning, the long staring silence that had gone out to the fields now went to the roads, to the distance, to the west. That man whose mind had been bound with acres lived now with narrow concrete miles. And his thought and his worry were not anymore with rainfall, with wind and dust, with the thrust of the crops. Eyes watched the tires, ears listened to the clattering motors, and minds struggled with oil, with gasoline, with the thinning rubber between air and road. Then a broken gear was tragedy. Then water in the evening was the yearning, and food over the fire. Then the will to go on was the need and strength to go on, and the spirit to go on. The wills thrust westward ahead of them, and fears that had once apprehended drought or flood now lingered with anything that might stop the westward crawling. So there's the answer number 5 about what they were worried about now as opposed to their old lives. The camps became fixed, each a short day's journey from the last. And on the road, the panic overcame some of the families so that they drove night and day, stopped to sleep in the cars, and drove on to the west, flying from the road, flying from movement. And these lusted so greatly to be settled that they set their faces into the west and drove toward it, forcing the clashing engines over the road. But most of the families changed and grew quickly into the new life. And when the sun went down, time to look out for a place to stop. The car pulled off the road and stopped, and because others were there first, certain courtesies were necessary. And the man, the leader of the family, leaned from the car. "Can we pull in here and sleep?" Why, sure, be proud to have you. What state you from? Come all the way from Arkansas. There's Arkansas people down in that fourth tent. That so? And then the great question, how's the water? And there's your answer to number 6, the great question. Well, she don't taste so good, but they's plenty. Well, thank you. No thanks to me. But the courtesies had to be. The car lumbered over the ground to the end tent and stopped. Then down from the car, the weary people climbed and stretched stiff bodies. Then the new tent sprang up. The children went for water, and the older boys cut brush or wood. The fires started, and supper was put on to boil or to fry. Early comers moved over, and states were exchanged, and friends and sometimes relatives discovered. Oklahoma, huh? What county? Cherokee. Well, I got folks there. You know the Allens? There's Allens all over Cherokee. You know the Willises? Why, sure. And a new unit was formed. The dusk came, but before the dark was down, the new family was of the camp. A word had been passed with every family. They were known people, good people. I know the Allens all my life. Simon Allen, old Simon, had trouble with his first wife. She was part Cherokee, pretty as a black colt. Sure. And young Simon, he married a Rudolph, didn't he? That's what I thought. They went to live in Enid, and he done real well. Only Allen ever done well. Got a garage. When the water was carried out and the wood cut, the children walked shyly, cautiously among the tents, and they made elaborate acquaintanceship gestures. A boy stopped near another boy and studied a stone, picked it up, examined it closely, spat on it, and rubbed it clean and inspected it until he forced the other to demand, "What you got there?" And casually, "Nothing, just a rock." "Well, what you looking at like that for?" "Thought I seen gold in it." "How'd you know? Gold ain't gold. It's black in a rock." "Sure, everybody knows that." "I bet it's fool's gold and you figured it was gold." "That ain't so, 'cause Pa, he found lots of gold and he told me how to look." "How'd you like to pick up a big old piece of gold?" "Say, I get the biggest son of a bitchin' piece of candy you ever seen." "I ain't let to swear, but I do anyways." "Me too. Hey, let's go to the spring." And young girls found each other and boasted shyly of their popularity and their prospects. The women worked over the fire, hurrying to get food to the stomachs of the family. Pork, if there was money in plenty, pork and potatoes and onions, Dutch oven biscuits or cornbread, and plenty of gravy to go over it, side meat or chops, and a can of boiled tea, black and bitter. Fried dough in drippings if money was slim. Dough fried crisp and brown, and the drippings poured over it. So there's number 7 about what they eat when they have some money and what they eat when they don't have very much money. Those families who were very rich or very foolish with their money ate canned beans and canned peaches and packaged bread and bakery cake, but they ate it secretly in their tents, for it would not have been good to eat such fine things openly. Even so, children eating their fried dough smelled the warming beans and were unhappy about it. When supper was over and the dishes dipped and wiped, the dark had come and the men squatted down to talk. And they talked of the land behind them. "I don't know what it's coming to," they said. "The country's spoiled. It'll come back, though, only we won't be there. Maybe," they thought, "maybe we sinned some way we didn't know about." Fella says to me, "Government fella." And he says, "She's gullied up on you." Government fella. He says, "If you plowed across the contour, she won't gully." Never did have no chance to try her. And the new super ain't plowing across the contour, running a fur 4 miles long that ain't stopping or going around Jesus Christ himself. And they spoke softly of their homes. They was a little cool house under the windmill. Used to keep milk in there to cream up, and watermelons. Go in there midday when she was hotter than a heifer, and she'd be just as cool as you'd want. Cut open a melon in there and she'd hurt your mouth, she was so cool. Water dripping down from the tank. They spoke of their tragedies. Had a brother, Charlie, hair as yellow as corn, and him a grown man. Played the accordion, nice too. He was harrowing one day and went to clear his lines. A harrow is this thing you drag behind the tractor that has like spikes that stick into the soil and drag with cords like that come off of them. So he was harrowing one day and went to clear his lines. Well, a rattlesnake buzzed and them horses bolted and the harrow went over Charlie, and the points dug into his guts and his stomach, and then they pulled his face off. God Almighty! They spoke of the future. Wonder what it's like out there. Well, the pictures sure do look nice. I seen one where it's hot and fine and walnut trees and berries. And right behind, close as a mule's ass to his withers, there's a tall up mountain covered with snow. That was a pretty thing to see. So they're talking about California here, kind of like where we are. Walnut trees and then Mount Diablo or Tahoe or whatever, snow on the mountain. California's the best. If we can get work, it'll be fine. Won't have no cold in the winter. Kids won't freeze on the way to school. I'm going to take care of my kids. Don't miss no more school. I can read good, but it ain't no pleasure to me like it with a fella that's used to it. And perhaps a man brought out his guitar to the front of his tent, and he sat on a box to play, and everyone in the camp moved slowly in toward him, drawn in toward him. Many men can chord a guitar, but perhaps this man was a picker. There you have something. The deep chords beating while the melody runs on the strings like little footsteps. Heavy, hard fingers marching on the frets. The man played, and the people moved slowly in on him until the circle was closed and tight. And then he sang 10-cent cotton and 40-cent meat. And the circle sang softly to him. And he sang, "Why do you cut your hair, girls?" And the circle sang. He wailed the song, "I'm leaving old Texas," that eerie song that was sung before the Spaniards came. Only the words were Indian then. And there's your answer to number 8 about the musical form they all enjoyed. And now the group was welded to one thing, one unit, so that in the dark the eyes of the people were inward, and their minds played in other times, and their sadness was like rest, like sleep. He sang the McAllister Blues, and then, to make up for it to the older people, he sang "Jesus Calls Me to His Side." The children drowsed with the music and went into tents to sleep, and the singing came into their dreams. And after a while, the man with the guitar stood up and yawned. "Good night, folks," he said. And they murmured, "Good night to you." And each wished he could pick a guitar, because it was a gracious thing. Then the people went to their beds, and the camp was quiet. And the owls coasted overhead, and the coyotes gabbled in the distance, and into the camp skunks walked, looking for bits of food, waddling, arrogant skunks, afraid of nothing. So stop and answer number 9 there about the word that is used to both start sentences and also continue them, and what effect that word gives on the structure and the feeling of the story. The night passed, and with the first streak of dawn, the women came out of the tents, built up the fires, and put the coffee to boil. And the men came out and talked softly in the dawn. "When you cross the Colorado River, there's the desert," they say. "Look out for the desert. See you don't get hung up. I'm going to take her at night." "Me too. She'll cut the living Jesus out of you." The families ate quickly, and the dishes were dipped and wiped. The tents came down. There was a rush to go. And when the sun arose, the camping place was vacant, only a little litter left by the people. And the camping place was ready for a new world in a new night. But along the highway, the cars of the migrant people crawled out like bugs, and the narrow concrete miles stretched ahead. So there's your answer to number 10 about the metaphor about how the people are described. This has been Migrant People by John Steinbeck. Thanks for reading and following along.